Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to my presentation. Today I'll be presenting on Executive Order 14187, titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. So, this executive order was introduced very early in the Trump administration, actually just a week after his inauguration this year, on January 28th of 2025. Now, really what the executive order seeks to do is to curb the very rapid rise of gender affirming care being carried out among children in the United States. Now, while the executive order is really the first of its kind, it is not by any means the first attempt by governments, whether that be on the state level or abroad in Europe, to scale back some of these treatments with regard to minors. Specifically, as of just last year, February 2024, 23 states had enacted laws and policies limiting youth access to gender affirming care. And furthermore, as of this year, that number has only grown. Now, in March of 2025, 24 states actually imposed legal penalties on healthcare practitioners providing this sort of care to minors. Now, it is a very loaded subject. Both sides present very strong arguments. And in this presentation, I'll hope to explore some of those and really just to have a conversation. So we'll start with one of the biggest cons of the executive order. And really, the biggest con is that it ignores the very clearly demonstrated short-term benefits of gender affirming care for struggling youth. Now, specifically in 2022, uh, a study published in the JAMA Network titled Mental Health Outcomes in Transgender and Non-Binary Youths Receiving Gender Affirming Care demonstrated very clearly that these treatments do have very positive effects in the short term. Specifically, it lowered risk of depression by 60%, and it lowered the risk of suicidal ideation by 73% among the transgender and non-binary youths, which it followed, specifically 104 transgender and non-binary youths, all aged 13 to 20. So there are various other studies which all come to the same conclusion, all very clearly demonstrate that in the short term, these treatments do show massive benefits to struggling young adults. And really, the other con of the executive order, similar to women's healthcare discussions, is it really starts to kind of blur the line between where does the state end and the sovereign individual begin. So, what can the state dictate that you can or cannot do to your body, and how can it dictate, your expression as an individual? That's, a question that I'm not sure I can answer. So now that we've gone over some of the pros, here you have some statistics regarding kind of the explosion of this sort of treatment and these sort of diagnoses in recent years. But now that we've talked about some of the cons of the bill, let's move on and we'll talk about some of the pros of the executive order, excuse me. So, one of the biggest pros behind the executive order is, and really the push to outlaw gender affirming care among minors more generally, is the lack of evidence regarding some of the long-term effects of these treatments. Now, the short-term effects, as we've talked about, are very well known, but it's the lack of evidence regarding the long-term effects that really gives you pause. Now, this isn't a new talking point. It was actually the main reason given by the National Health Services in England just last year in 2024 when they set up their minimum age requirements for puberty blockers. And specifically, the National Health Service in England cited uncertainties regarding long-term impacts on sexual, cognitive, or broader developmental outcomes. So that's one of the biggest negatives. Now, despite the lack of evidence regarding long-term benefits, long-term implications, there's no question that some of the effects of these treatments do persist and can persist long-term. And in fact, some of their effects are irreversible. So, according to the Mayo Clinic, as we've talked about, gender affirming hormone therapy is often used to develop secondary characteristics, physical characteristics, to help better align the body with a child's gender identity. Now, the problem stated by them is that some of these changes triggered by affirming hormone therapy actually cannot be reversed, and others may require surgery to reverse. So, this quickly becomes one of the biggest pros to the executive order, and really one of the biggest cons to gender affirming care more broadly. Now, having looked at both of these arguments, both sides of this coin, here you have some of the risks and benefits. Again, risks being blood clots, stroke, decreased fertility, and the benefits a lot of the times being enhanced self-esteem, lower risk of depression, lower suicidal ideation, general better well-being from a mental standpoint. Now, having seen and having gone over the evidence here on both sides of the coin, I think both supporters and opponents of the executive order and gender affirming care more broadly do present very strong arguments. Now, while critics of the gender affirming care, like we've talked about, point to uncertainties regarding long-term implications, irreversibility, um, proponents have very clearly demonstrated that this care can provide massive benefits in the short term. So it's a question of short term versus long term. Now, after evaluating these two positions, I would say that the proponents of this executive order, critics of gender affirming care more broadly, do present a better argument. Now, there's no doubt that the short-term implications are there. The hormones, puberty blockers do provide very tangible relief, but it's the long-term uncertainty and irreversibility of some of these effects that is really tough to overlook. Now, on top of it all, the brain develops differently with young boys and girls. For girls, the brain usually develops around 22, while with boys, it can take till the late 20s, sometimes 30. So the brain for girls is about 50% developed around the age of 11. For boys, that's around the age of 15. And that's right around the age that we're talking about administering gender affirming care. So I'll ask you the question. If a child's brain, when a child's brain is about 50% developed, are these treatments appropriate? Is it something that's appropriate for that age group? Now, that's not to say it may not be appropriate later in life, but with regards to the executive order, it defines youth as anybody under the age of 19. And that's really the age we're talking about. So that's a question I would ask you, a thought I would leave you with. I hope that I presented some good talking points here and some good resources provided in the presentation if you'd like to explore and dive deeper into the conversation yourself. Other than that, I appreciate you being here, listening to the presentation, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.